organization we're recording, for being here to provide a floods and fires update this afternoon. I'm sure you're all aware that as the warmer months approach, you can feel the change happening across the territory. There's renewed energy as we all come out from underneath another winter and dust off the camping gear, swamp out the skis for mountain bikes, and really adjust how we meet the changing needs of our communities. The environment is shifting also. Things are melting and the sun is hanging around a little longer throughout the day. They're also shifting globally and locally, and we're seeing this more and more every year. With this change comes a growing awareness among Yukoners about the risks of floods and fires, and I understand that this is on many, many people's minds. That's why we've intensified our efforts to communicate about the potential challenges we may encounter in the approaching spring and summer seasons, along with proactive steps we collectively can take. This week, officials across government, cabinet members, and members of the opposition will be receiving a similar briefing to the one you're getting today. Sharing this information transcends politics. This is about working together to spread awareness and good information. I've been in your shoes as reporters where I'm not getting information from governments, and I really think it's important that we communicate to all our partners, and that certainly includes the media, and I'm happy to do that today and take your questions. As we listen to the officials, the people with all the knowledge, it's important to note the following the steps that individuals can take to prepare themselves. I talked about this quite a bit in the past, but it is vital. Measures the government is undertaking to ensure readiness for folks. Where to access vital information and what we can expect in coming months based on the latest insights which the officials will be giving you this afternoon. It's crucial we stay proactive and prepared for the possibility of floods and fires in the coming months. I want everybody to be assured your safety and well-being are our top priorities, and we will do everything we can to support you. The budget of 2024-25 includes funding to support hazard identification and risk assessments, it shows how we're going to work with our partners on plans to support climate resilient infrastructure investments and improving our climate forecasting capability. And it also supports access to insurance and updating our emergency preparedness communications infrastructure. We all have a role to play in preventing emergencies and disasters. And so we ask that as much as possible, Yukoners do the same to prepare themselves and their community. So I will now turn it over to officials to carry it away, and I'll see you at the end. Thanks. I'll leave it to the good folks at Wildland Fire and Beyond to give you your briefing this afternoon. Thanks.
Great, thank you. Okay, so next we're going to hear from Anthony Bier.
Okay, thanks, Julia. Hopefully you can see my screen and you don't see my Zoom taskbar at the top. Does it look okay?
Correct, yeah, looks great.
Okay. So thanks for being here. My name's Anthony Bier. I'm a hydrologist with the Water Resources branch of Yukon Environment, and I am going to go over the current snowpack conditions and hydrometeorological, which more or less means what are our rivers and lakes doing, and then cover our spring flood potential risk assessment here. So a brief overview, I'll talk about the April 1st snowpack. The snow bulletin came out yesterday and included this information, so I'll be reviewing largely what's in there in those first two bullets. I'll then quickly review the types of flood risks that we experience here in the Yukon, and then get into our flood risk potential forecast. Then I'll shift to talking about specifically where our ice breakup concerns are, where our freshet flooding concerns are, and then a little bit on some of the changes we're making to how we are rolling out information this year, and then a quick summary. So the snowpack across the southern Yukon is pretty close to average. You can see the green color across the bottom of the water equivalent map. So that's how much water there is in the snowpack if we were to melt it and that water was just standing on the ground. It gets a little bit drier through the central Yukon from the White all the way over to the headwaters of the Stewart and Pelly rivers, a little bit drier than average conditions. And then increasing again as we move north into the Klondike, more so than into the Peel and the Porcupine. And want to highlight the Porcupine Basin, where we have 166% of the historical median. That little box plot is pulled right from the snow bulletin, and you can see that we're setting a new record for the April 1st basin-wide estimated snow water equivalent. And that's 43 millimeters higher than last year, which was also a high snowpack year. How does this snowpack compare to previous years? On the right side of your screen, you'll see last year's April 1st map, which was sort of mixed from average to above average. So in general, we have less snow through central Yukon and southern Yukon this year, but a little bit more in Porcupine and Peel, and pretty similar conditions in the lower Yukon, the Klondike, Dawson City area to last year. But if we look back even further, in terms of the central and southern Yukon, we have to go all the way back to 2019 to find a year that was drier. 2019 was a very dry year, but this year in central and southern Yukon anyway, for the most part, is less snow than we've seen in the previous 4 years. So currently, most rivers are slightly above the normal range of flows for this time of year. Caveat is that these are estimated flows based on a few measurements under ice, which is challenging. So this is our best estimate. That's a trend that we're seeing in recent years with shorter winters and more groundwater in the ground, keeping those base flows high through the winter. Although groundwater going into the fall was lower in 2023 than it was in 2022, with the exception of the Klondike. Groundwater levels were still very high in the Klondike going into fall. An important note is that we had a dynamic freeze up on the lower Klondike. What that means is that ice that had been forming during freeze up was transported downstream, formed a jam near the bridge that goes into Dawson City, and froze in place and stayed there through the winter. But overall, in most places, ice thicknesses are expected to be below average, and most of the measurements we're getting from our partners at the Water Survey of Canada are confirming that a little below average to below average ice thicknesses. So what are the types of flood risk? Again, a lot of people know this. I won't spend too much time here, but in sort of chronological order, usually we see localized snowmelt runoff causing issues first for people. This is usually at the property scale, ditches being overwhelmed because culverts are still frozen, maybe smaller creeks hopping their banks, that type of thing. Then we move up to a larger scale event like river ice breakup, and that can impact whole communities or neighborhoods, the ice jamming, that is. Then we have the peak freshet flows, what we think of as the main pulse of water from that melting snow. It can impact roads. It happens on rivers, on lakes, and it can affect whole communities. Then we have our summer peaks, which is lake flooding like you see in Teslin there. And this is usually on large lakes or in more heavily glaciated basins that have big inputs from melting glaciers in the summer. So that's Southern Lakes, the Elsek Basin, the White River Basin. And then of course there can be convective storms where you get a localized downpour. It's more isolated, and that's typically the type of event that's responsible for events like the Alaska Highway washout in 2022. And then there's groundwater flooding. And when we say groundwater flooding, we're usually thinking of underground infrastructure being submerged by the water table and causing problems for septic systems, contaminating wells, overwhelming wastewater treatment infrastructure. So Moving on to flood risk potential, we break it down into high, moderate, low categories. And the way you can think of this is low really represents an average year. We have average snowpack, average water levels. That's a low flood potential situation. So a moderate flood risk is above average, and a high flood risk is well above average. I think that's the easiest way to think about these categories. So for ice jam flooding, we assess the flood risk potential separately from freshet flooding. We have high in the Klondike Valley, mostly owing to that dynamic freeze up that I spoke of earlier, as well as above average snowpack. Dawson is low, and that's because on balance, the snowpack above Dawson City in the Yukon River is pretty close to average. As well as Dawson being protected by a dike. And then in Old Crow, we have a rating of high. Similar story for snowmelt peak flows, a moderate in the Klondike Valley and high for Old Crow, again, owing to that record snowpack. So drilling down a little bit more into the river ice breakup concerns, we have close to normal ice thicknesses on the Porcupine River from the measurements that we have. We have well above average estimated discharge now, and we've had pretty minimal warming to date. For the next 2 weeks, temperatures are forecast to be close to average for what it's worth for the 14-day outlook. And so our main concern here is if we see a sudden sustained warming event. So if we flip the switch from sort of normal coldish temperatures, freezing at night, and we get up into the teens and we stay above freezing at night for multiple days on end, driving a whole bunch of snow melt, that can cause a mechanical or dynamic breakup of the river, and then we're more likely to see ice jamming. So that's our concern. Our ideal scenario is a slow and steady meltout and degradation of that ice. So when it does move, it's weak, it gets pushed downstream without jamming. For Dawson in the Klondike Valley, again, it's that dynamic freeze up by the bridge that's the concern, and ice coming from upstream and jamming against that more resistant ice cover. So right now, water levels are above historic, and there is a correlation with high water levels at freeze up and high water levels at breakup at this location. We haven't seen too much ice movement to date, very limited degradation. And we just got some fresh snow over the weekend, which doesn't help things because that reflects sunlight and doesn't allow that radiation to penetrate down into the ice and degrade it. I should differentiate that we see the risk being higher down towards the bridge and sort of the Prospector Road area where that ice jam is, and not as significant in the Rock Creek and Henderson Corners areas. There's not evidence of the same sort of dynamic freeze up jams at those locations. And of course, again, just quickly, Dawson and the Yukon River, the freeze up occurred above Dawson, and that didn't allow an ice bridge to form this year. And we have an average to below average snowpack upstream. So we have that low risk we're assessing for Dawson City itself. Freshet concerns, I think I covered this pretty well already, but we're concerned mostly about that rapid warming driving high flows, both Old Crow and Klondike Valley, but the same goes for creeks and rivers in the Porcupine and Peel Basin that cross the Dempster Highway. There's also really high snowpack along the Dempster there. So there is that risk. So again, the ideal scenario is progressive melting with no rain and an extended snowmelt period. And the worst case scenario is rapid melting and or rain on snow events, somewhat like we saw in the Klondike last year, and a compressed snowmelt period. We are going to be posting advisories on Yukon, or on the Yukon Flood Atlas again this year. And from April 15th onwards, we have something new. It's the current situation tab. We'll be posting updates there on current conditions with forecaster comments during the breakup and freshet periods. and there will be daily updates during active advisories. Something else that will be a little bit different than previous years, as we will issue high water advisories when breakup is imminent. We won't be waiting for signs of high breakup induced water levels. Simply, we will release a high stream flow advisory when we believe breakup is imminent. And you can check back on the current situation page for daily updates on the conditions we're observing on the river as we monitor breakup both in Klondike and as well as on the Porcupine and Old Crow. So in summary, our high-risk communities going into this breakup and freshet period are Old Crow and the neighborhoods, communities of the Klondike Valley. And the timing and progression of snowmelt and precipitation are really the critical drivers, regardless of the snowpack levels. And you know, I should say that even if you have a low flood risk, that doesn't mean there's no risk of flooding. It just means there's a low or average risk. So it can still happen. It's just very unlikely. Water Resources continues to monitor daily, as we have been for weeks already, and will do so throughout the flood season. And we will be releasing those advisories on the Flood Atlas as they are necessary. So with that, thank you. I don't know, Julia, if we're holding questions till the end or.
Yes, we are going to hold questions till the end. Thank you so much, Anthony. Really appreciate that presentation. And next, we are going to hear from Haley Ritchie, who is the Fire Information Officer with Wildland Fire Management. I'm just going to share my screen here to roll the slides. Can we all see that?
Awesome. Looks good. Thanks, Julia. So my name is Haley Ritchie. I'm one of the 2 fire information officers in the Yukon. And I'm here to give a brief overview of what we know so far of the wildfire situation in the Yukon as we head into the spring. So at this time of year in the Yukon, wildland fire management staff are returning to their bases across the territory ahead of a fire season. We have 6 regional and 5 forward attack fire bases across the Yukon, with around 75 initial attack firefighters and another 40 overhead staff that manage crews, aircraft, and provide logistical support. Yukon also has 14 agreements with First Nations for initial attack services. We look forward to working with our First Nation partners and Yukon First Nation Wildfire again this year. Yukon First Nation Wildfire offers a 20% unit crew in addition to representation for some initial attack crew agreements. Finally, news this year, we have 4 additional crews that have been hired this year, bringing the total to 28 crews with an average size of around 3 people. Additional crews will be stationed in Whitehorse, Dawson, Watson Lake, and Haines Junction. Looking across the territory, if you're near a window, we are still seeing the occasional snowfall in the Yukon. Snow is still melting. But as that snow begins to melt, when it disappears, we start seeing fire danger ratings coming into effect. So those are posted online on the Wildfire Hub or on local signboards across the territory. Unlike some neighboring jurisdictions, this year in the Yukon, we are not seeing numerous holdover fires that continue to burn all winter. And at this time, forecasters are predicting that temperature and precipitation for April and May look to be near normal levels. So the forecast, and it's always a forecast, a prediction, not a sure thing, but right now the forecast is for a normal spring when it comes to the wildfire season. However, that can change. This early in the year, we can't accurately predict what the fire season will bring. Most wildfire forecasting takes place just 3 to 10 days out. So it's hard to give a lot of information about what our wildfire season might look like in the Yukon right now. But as the snow melts, wildfire is on some people's minds this year. It's certainly on our minds, but we depend on all Yukoners to do what we can to be proactive about wildfire. So a couple important things come with that. Legally, wildfire season begins in the Yukon on April 1st. So after that date, Yukoners need permission to burn brush. People who live in Whitehorse, Dawson, or Watson Lake city limits need to follow their municipality's burning rules. And outside of that, you need to call your local Yukon Wildland Fire Office for permission to burn. This spring, we're also asking Yukoners, as people get into their gardens, doing planting, spring cleanup, to apply fire smart principles. So these are guidelines that help us protect our home and property from the threat of wildfire. So this can reduce the chance that an ember or spark from a nearby fire would catch your property. And there's a lot of different things you can do to make that happen. The most critical is that 1.5 meters around a home. It's really important people are removing flammable materials. So again, lots of different strategies to do that. You should be cleaning out your gutters. You should be checking for debris, leaves and woody materials underneath your deck. Really good idea to move that wood pile if it's beside your house. Things like that. Lawn maintenance is also a part of Fire Smart. For Wildland Fire, this spring, we're also planning to conduct prescribed burns where we can, where conditions are appropriate. Right now, we're in the planning phase for some burns in Watson Lake, Mayo, Carmax, and Whitehorse. Those are always dependent on conditions. We're continuing to monitor the weather and what's possible there. But prescribed burning is a really important tool we can use in the spring, fall, sometimes in the summer to help renew our boreal forests, help continue that natural cycle of fire when we can have it under control. And it can also be used to remove fuel that could threaten communities in the future. That's a strategic fuel management technique that we have. Looking forward ahead to potential wildfires this summer too, we want to remind Yukoners where they can get information on wildfire. The headquarters of all our information is the Wildfire Hub online at yukon.ca. An easy place to find that is yukon.ca/emergencies. And so that has all kinds of really valuable information for media as well as for the public. We have a fire map there. We provide updates on notable fires, and we also have information on smoke impacts, fire danger ratings, burn bans, all that information. That's the place to find it. This year, we've also created a new lower bandwidth webpage option. So that means you can update this, or you can you can have access to the same wildfire updates, even if you have a slower internet connection, which is certainly something we're mindful of in the Yukon. So that takes care of most of my presentation. So you can find the links to the hub, again, yukon.ca/emergencies. Mike Fancy and I are your two Yukon wildfire information officers, and you can always give us a call at 867-393-7415. And the last phone number that everybody should have handy as we head into wildfire season is the fire line for reporting a wildfire. We really do depend on help from the public to do that. And that one is 1-888-798-FIRE. So 3473. Yeah, so that's all from me. Thanks so much. I'm happy to answer questions after the presentations are completed.
Great. Thank you so much, Haley. Next up, we are going to hear from Greg Blackjack, who is the director of the Emergency Measures Organization here at Yukon Government.
Thanks, Julia, and thanks, Minister Mostyn, Anthony, and Haley for your comments earlier. My name is Greg Blackjack. I'm the Director of Emergency Measures Organization, and I work with all of these partners to help us protect the Yukon. And I'm here today to speak about the role of Emergency Measures Organization, EMO, and how we help communities prepare, how we prepare our government, and individual preparedness for the upcoming season. So EMO, Emergency Measures Organization, coordinates government's response to large-scale and complex emergencies. And as well, we work year-round on emergency preparedness within Yukon government and with our municipal and First Nation government partners and external response partners. And today I'll give you an overview of that preparedness work. So first, I'm going to start with community preparedness. And over this off season, we've been working with our community and First Nation partners. One of the things that we do is we've deployed our flood equipment across the Yukon in strategic locations to be prepared to move swiftly in a response capacity. So putting our items such as the sandbags you see there in strategic locations to move quickly around the Yukon as needed. We also work with our partners on emergency management training, and over the past year, we've done many preparedness meetings and training out in the communities. This includes tabletop exercises and updating emergency plans. And we've worked in different communities such as Faro, Mayo, Dawson, Haines Junction, as well as unincorporated communities as well. This Thursday, we'll be hosting a seasonal readiness briefing for our partners in the First Nation and municipal governments. This will include the partners here, WFM and Water Resources, to allow those governments to get information on their communities and the risks we foresee straight from the source as we do. And this will help with our planning going into this season. We've also held 2 recent information sessions over the lunch hours called Lunch and Learns, and these were about emergency preparedness, evacuation protocols and procedures, and included presentations from Health and Social Services, Emergency Support Services, as well as the Red Cross to discuss their role in supporting communities in emergencies. So as you've seen from the earlier presentation, the areas we're focused on right now are the Klondike and Old Crow. Old Crow specifically having above average and record snowfall amounts. We're working with Dawson City, Trondheim, and Vuntech-Witchen to review and update their plans, and again move response equipment into those communities to assist in our response. We've also have held training and tabletop exercises with these communities. One of my planners is currently up in Dawson right now doing some training with Trondheim-Witchen First Nation and the city of Dawson, as well as our other partners within the community. And that will end with a tabletop on Friday with those governments as well. And these communities understand they can reach EMO at any time, 24/7, through our duty officer to request assistance with emergency response. Next, I'll roll on to our government preparedness. And over the past few months, we've been really working with our internal department partners across government to strengthen our protocols and work on all of government approach to our emergency response and build our relationships between departments, including Highways and Public Works, Community Services, Health and Social Services, Department of Environment, as well as others. This will just help us respond more efficiently and more effectively in a coordinated approach to assist Yukoners. We've also hosted emergency management training and tabletop exercises here in town for people within Yukon government to build our skill set within with our Yukon Public Service. We try to build up our internal knowledge and training to help bolster the staff we can draw on to assist in running the ECC, which is the room you see on the slide there, when we're coordinating government's response to events. In this past fall, that included Operation Nanook Tatagit, which is the one picture on the side with the military in the room. We basically held an exercise with federal partners and our local partners, including City of Whitehorse and First Nation governments, to test our abilities and our systems in place in a large-scale power outage and the effects on the City of Whitehorse and outlying communities. And we've also held 4 other tabletops throughout the off season for for this type of training. We're also hosting a tabletop next week with the city of Whitehorse and our emergency response partners within the city. This will include 1 day of training, EOC specific training, and the next day will be a full-on tabletop with our partners within city of Whitehorse. And this will be a fire event that threatens the city of Whitehorse. So we're looking forward to training and working on those procedures and plans for the city. So for our mitigation materials, I'm not going to get into the numbers for sandbags and super bags, but we have a surplus left over from last year. So we have a fairly large amount, both within our storage here in Whitehorse, but also already placed throughout the Yukon in locations where we see fit to deploy quickly. We're also putting standing offer agreements in place with our suppliers to make sure we're ready to replenish those supplies if needed. Getting these agreements out of the way before the season kicks off just helps us concentrate on the main job at hand. And we meet regularly with our response partners outside the territory through Public Safety Canada. And this helps keep our federal partners as well as our neighboring jurisdictions aware of the situation at hand up here, and that allows them and us to prepare if we need to ask for assistance or provide assistance to other jurisdictions. So staying in touch with people as we move into the season. So as I mentioned before, it's a whole of government approach within Yukon government to respond to an emergency. And we rely on that support from the other departments, and we appreciate the staff who've come to train with us and are prepared to support Yukon government's emergency response when needed. Moving on to individual preparedness. Everyone has a role in preparing for an emergency. So our comms team is getting ready to put out a information campaign throughout March, April, and May to inform Yukoners on how to prepare themselves and their families. This includes preparing a 72-hour kit, creating an emergency plan for your home and your family, and tips on protecting your property from floods and fires. This campaign will come out in print, social media, and radio ads, along with printed resources that we'll share with our communities and First Nation governments to share with their citizens. This campaign will culminate in Emergency Preparedness Week, May 5th to 11th, which is a national event in partnership with Public Safety Canada. And at that time, we'll also be doing a test of our alert ready system. To assist Yukoners on preparing for emergencies, we've updated the web pages at preparedyukon.ca. And we've also, as you heard earlier, changes to the flood atlas based on feedback from last season. So more timely information coming in on the flood atlas, which in correlation with our business is the public alerting. So with those new changes to the advisories, ice breakup forecasts for specific rivers will trigger the relevant advisory level. For example, high stream flow, high water advisory, or flood watch as soon as they're released. And these advisories will be shared through the alert ready system. High stream advisory or flood watch will be non-broadcast intrusive, which means it won't go out on every cell phone, won't be the loud noise on your phones as we see with a broadcast intrusive, but the flood warnings will be broadcast intrusive due to ice jam or flash flooding. And again, non-broadcast intrusive alerts are disseminated through third parties and apps, such as the Weather Network and Alertables. And the broadcast intrusive alerts are sent through the cell phones, radio, and cable TV station, in addition to the above apps. And overall, with the activities I discussed today and the work that's underway in the communities, I think we're looking well prepared moving into this season. A lot of work over the last few years has culminated into these adjustments in our products to help inform Yukoners better as we move through these events. And I'll finish it off there. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Greg. Now we're going to hear from Minister Mostyn once more before opening the floor to questions.
Thanks, Julie, and thanks again to all our officials for those updates. You know, we're really fortunate it's such a knowledgeable team devoted to keeping Yukoners safe and informed. This overview provided today, it underscores the proactive measures being taken by Wildland Fire Management and the Emergency Measures Organization to protect our communities. We all have to remain vigilant and take proactive steps to protect ourselves, our family, and our properties. Greg was talking about the 72-hour kit. I've spoken extensively about this. Have that kit ready and have a plan. Look around your home, see what you want to save, what you can fit in your car. Identify some clothes and maybe a little bit of food that you can have as, you know, just make sure that stuff is ready and you have it in your mind in the event of an emergency. It's not going to overwhelm everybody quickly. There will be time. We often, I know team at Wildland Fire and at the EMO generally try to provide some advanced warning of these things, but have it in your head what you need. Make sure your cars are filled up, all that stuff. Look at your insurance. Make sure your home insurance is up to date and covers what you have around your home. Fire smart. All those things are really, really vital. Fire smarting, again, I know was mentioned earlier, but having that done takes some of the pressure off our resources, the firefighting crews and everything else, who, if it's done right, they don't have to worry about you. So it's important to have that done. Even with all that planning in place, Yukoners may still need financial support to recover from an emergency. We saw that last year in Dawson. That's why we've created funding programs to help Yukoners impacted by large natural disasters. This year, we're creating a permanent Yukon disaster financial assistance program in advance of any potential disasters to help get money into people's hands sooner, to help them understand what will and will not be covered. It's going to be based on the federal program, and that's changing. So we've got a program that we're putting the final touches on for this year, and then we're going to look at the federal program, which is the details are coming out in the coming month or so. And we're going to then start to gear the future programs so they align very well with the federal programs, which will just make it easier for Yukoners. This year's program will include funding streams for households, small businesses, and farms, similar to previous years. And not all disaster incidents, not everything that everybody owns will be eligible. So just when it comes out, familiarize yourself with that program. As with past programs we created in response to natural disasters, the program will help Yukoners manage the often significant financial costs of large-scale natural flooding, landslides, and other natural disasters. And I'll be sharing more about this in the coming weeks. So I'd like to remind Yukoners to ensure their insurance covers flooding, wildfires I mentioned earlier, and other natural disaster impacts. The Yukon Government Recovery Program only considers uninsurable losses. All right, as we head into the warmer months, let's remain calm, everybody, and yet vigilant, because the team needs your eyes and ears on the ground as we're going on. So make sure you get that fire line in your phones, and let's all work together to navigate the upcoming season. Thank you very much for your patience and your time today. Thanks to the officials again, and I guess we'll take your questions, but I'll leave that for Julie to ascertain and work through. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Minister Mostyn. So we are now going to turn it over to the news media for questions. I have here, I've got that we have CKRW, the Star, the Sun, CBC, Radio Canada, City News, and Yukon News with us. So we have just under 20 minutes. So I'm going to say, starting with one question per outlet. And then if we have time at the end, I just want to be respectful of everyone's time before 3:30, then I will start again from the top. Just a reminder that, of course, Haley, Mike at WFM, myself, the folks working in information throughout government, we are here to help answer your questions. So if we aren't able to get to all of your questions during this media conference, never fear, we will make sure to get you an answer as soon as we can. So I'm going to start off with CKRW and with Dan Davidson on deck. Anything from the rush?
Hi, this is Nathan. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Thank you. This is for Minister Mostyn. The situation in Old Crow with the flood risk being elevated, has there been any extra action taken beyond what's already being done to liaise with the community?
Yes, that's a good question. Thank you very much. And Greg has some context about this as well. I know that the team has been working very closely with the Wildland over the last several months about preparing them and doing tabletop exercises and others, and he may have some details. From my point of view, I actually phoned Chief Frost this afternoon in advance of this briefing to let them to give her a heads up that we're having the media conference, and to talk to her about the data showing the flood risk on the Porcupine River. So I'm working with that, and I know our officials are working very closely with the Wildland team as well. So we're also moving material into the North Yukon it's already started, but it'll be continuing this week and in the coming weeks to prepare ourselves for the flood pressures we're seeing both in Dawson City and or in the Klondike River Valley and in Old Crow. So, getting material into Old Crow is tricky. So we've been preparing for that in advance. We have a lot of flood mitigation equipment in the territory. I think there's sandbagging equipment going north into the Stewart Crossing area and others. But so we are working on this immediately, and we're and over the coming weeks and months.
Great. Thank you so much. Greg, anything to add, or good to move on to the next?
I think we could add that there's many players at the table when we're dealing with Wildland First Nation. Cernak is also involved. Crown Indigenous Resources. They have the funding capacity to assist in this situation, so we're working with them as well, and really talking to experts on how to protect against ice jam flooding. It's not we saw it in the Klondike. It's not the easiest thing to protect your shorelines from. So we're looking at all options to consider for not necessarily protecting the riverbanks like you would think. It would be more protecting infrastructure throughout the community, protecting different areas of concern. So those are the types of plans we're working on with VGFN and our other response partners.
Great, thank you. Moving now to Dan, who I believe is representing the Star and the Sun, both celestial bodies at this report, but one question per outlet, so 2 questions for Dan.
Can you hear me?
Yep, loud and clear.
Okay. Question relates to the odd situation that occurred last year. It's not unusual for Rock Creek and areas south of Whitehorse to flood every few years. But what was unusual about last year was that there was a flood, and then there was a reprieve, and then there was a second flood. And having 2 floods in the same season is unusual. Is that likely to happen this year?
I'll ask Anthony to take a stab at that one. Thanks, Dan.
Yeah, I can't really speak to the likelihood of that happening. What I will say is we have the conditions that we had last year that would set up the potential for that to happen again. And the open water flooding that followed the breakup flooding, it was a rain on snow event. And we have a lot of snowpack in particularly in the North Klondike part, less so in the South Klondike part of the basin. And if we get intense downpours on snowpack still in place, then we have that potential to drive that kind of flooding again following breakup. But what I think is important to note is that we had that more dynamic freeze up in the Henderson Corner Rock Creek areas last year, that more resistant ice cover. And this year, it's from our surveys, the ice cover appears to be most resistant at the downstream location near the bridge. So I think in terms of probabilities, it's much higher the probability that we'll see an ice jam flood down towards the areas surrounding the bridge, like C4 subdivision and the various businesses on the east side of the bridge. Again, Prospector Road area, which is sort of that first neighborhood upstream of the bridge, and less likely up in Rock Creek and Henderson Corner, but still possible, just less likely than last year.
Okay,
Coming
thank
away
you.
coming away from last year, if I may, there wasn't a lot of dissatisfaction with the way that things were handled during the flood situation itself, either of them, although it was a shock when there was a second one a week after the first one seemed to have ended. What had a much higher level of dissatisfaction was the what was considered to be a lack of really effective government response in the recovery period. This one probably goes to Minister Mostyn.
So the question is, are we improving? Yeah, we are. We're taking lessons learned from every single incident we've seen. That's been my MO since getting into this role, both as Highways Minister and now as Minister of Community Services, to have action after action reviews and to see how we do things better into the future. I think that's the only way you can do it. So I've heard the concerns out of Dawson with the recovery effort. I think we have taken all that into account, and we're going to try to do better this year. I mean, that's all we can do. Past is the past. We're looking forward and trying to improve our systems going forward.
Thank you for that.
Okay, thanks. I'm going to pass it over to CBC now with Radio Canada on deck.
Hi, this is Rob Sam with CBC News. In regards to the involvement of the Canadian Red Cross, I was wondering if someone could speak to what, if any, involvement they will have in the Yukon with the emergency responses throughout the summer.
Sure, I think Greg would probably be best placed to speak to that one.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for the question. Red Cross has been contracted through Health and Social Services to support the Emergency Support Services team. This is a large step for our territorial government as well as our smaller governments. They bring a lot of resources to the table to assist the Yukon, as well as in a large scale emergency if we required supports outside of the Yukon. Like you saw in Yellowknife, they have operations across the country that could assist in a major event. So this will be the first year of really using those services, and it'll really help bolster the emergency support services of Health and Social Services.
Okay, thank you. Next up, Radio Canada, and with if we have city news here, then you're on deck. The question from Radio Canada is, sorry, I don't have a microphone. With the previous wildfire season and the evacuation of both Old Crow and Mayo, plus what we've seen in NWT, what has been done differently this year in terms of preparation and what has been learned? So that's one for either Greg or the minister, I'd say. Thanks, Sarah.
All right, I'll take the first crack, Greg, and then you can come slipstreaming in behind me because you've got the on the ground professional knowledge. I've got 30,000 feet. But again, we've had the after action, Greg and the team at Emergency Measures and at Community Services has been working really, really hard with communities across the territory. And Greg can give you a pretty good idea how many there are, working closely to refine and update our emergency planning, to develop those synapses between our organizations, be it a First Nation government, a municipal government, and emergency measures, and our government agencies, just to make sure that people know who to call, what's expected, and all of that planning. So we've taken the, I said before, practice makes perfect. So we've had really significant flooding in 2021, 22, 23, and fire seasons, the emergency evacuations from Mayo and Old Crow last year. So we've been working, assessing what happened in those previous years, and building on the expertise we're developing through the unfortunate practice we're getting to refine our systems and build those connections between our various governments and emergency response teams. I'm going to leave it there, and I'll pass it quickly, and I'll pass it over to Greg.
Thank you, Minister. And that's exactly why we hold after action reviews from every event, so we can learn off of those events and make sure we're not repeating things that we shouldn't be. We're also have eyes on Yellowknife and everything they went through, and the trials and tribulations of the size of event that they went through. Just this week, I was meeting with Public Safety Canada, as well as our neighboring jurisdictions, BC, Alberta, and NWT, about preparing for mass evacuations and getting out the highest risk and the vulnerable populations first to make your evacuations less strenuous. So the talk was surrounding moving populations such as hospitals and critical care patients, as well as extended care patients, and then your other vulnerable populations. So we're already having those discussions because our neighbors in the NWT were having those discussions as they lived it. So we're preparing as best we can, and again, learning from previous events. So with that said, I really want to say a huge thank you for last year for Quanland Dun First Nation and the other First Nations that stood up and supported Old Crow and Mayo citizens through a very tough time. They definitely helped those people, and they helped us as responders to do our jobs. So thanks.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm not sure if we do have City News on the line. If we do, then now is your time. And then after that, Yukon News. Okay, I'll say, Jim, go for it. And afterwards, if there's anybody that I've missed, then I will call on you next. Okay, question for Greg Blackjack from Jim Elliott at the Yukon News. Does more flood mitigation equipment still need to be deployed to Old Crow? If so, how is this done? Planes, or is there an ice road this year? What is still needed, and who puts those mitigations in place?
Yes, obviously it's just the logistics of servicing a community like Old Crow has its challenges, but definitely we'll be flying in what we can, looking at how best to get that equipment on the ground, as well as the personnel to deploy that equipment. So that is the planning that we're doing with Old Crow, as well as our other response partners. Other groups that are involved in this would be things like the Canadian Rangers, the EMS, Wildland Fire, all of our response partners, RCMP. They all have a place at the table to help plan, especially a complex operation such as protecting Old Crow.
Okay, great. Thank you. Did I miss any outlets from the Yukon or beyond? Okay, well, in that case, we're basically at time, so I'm going to wrap it up here. Thank you so much to all of our presenters here for sharing the seasonal outlook with us and what we're doing to get ready as Yukon government and with our partners across the territory. And a huge thanks, primary thanks to all of the media who are here today as we go through the response season, fire and flood season. We know that you're vital partners in sharing this kind of information with communities, with those who need to hear it. So we look forward to continuing that work with you this summer. If you need any further information, please feel free to get in touch with me and I can put you in touch with the right official who's been speaking with and sharing expertise today. And as a reminder, all of our current forecasting and emergency incident information is available at yukon.ca/emergencies. We've got links to the wildfire hub there and to the flood atlas. And if you're looking for information about how to get prepared, Prepared Yukon is the place online to go for that. So thank you so much, everybody, and have a wonderful rest of your Wednesday.
Thanks, Yoli.